Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to review the $170 Arylic A50 integrated amplifier and streamer. And let's be honest guys, this is a serious budget category. You can't even buy a decent set of speaker stands for $170. Guys, I bought a Bluetooth adapter 4 years ago. That was more than $170. And if I'm being completely honest, my speaker cables cost more than $170. So like, the fact that technology has gone to a point today where we can have an integrated amp with a built-in streamer, with software, with pre-outs that you can use for adding a bigger amp or a subwoofer, AirPlay, Bluetooth, and all that stuff for 170 bucks, we're already winning, honestly. So the question is, does it sound good and is it worth the money? Because if it doesn't sound good, like who cares about all that, right? So let's just get into it. The top end is going to be on the brighter side of neutral, and the good news is with that brightness will come more detail. That's not always the case on cheaper gear. A lot of times cheaper gear, when it's brighter, it's just brighter and there's not necessarily more detail. I appreciated that. And when I say it's bright, I didn't run into any fatigue, and I am actually very sensitive to listening fatigue, so it's not that bright. It is just on the forward side of neutral. The top end was also very open, had a lot of air to it and a lot of decay. When a sound of, whether it be like a speaker, an amplifier, a preamp, whatever, is very open and has great decay, I find that very pleasing. I feel like that makes the component sound like it's more expensive than it actually is, so I like that part of its sound. Moving on to the mid-range is going to be on the lean and cool side of neutral and a little bit thin at times with certain vocals. However, those vocalists did stand out very well in the mix. They did project forward in a nice way, and I found that very pleasing. The mid-range was not as textured as something that's maybe twice or three times its price like the Iota VX SA3, but still quite good, especially in this price category. If you were hoping for something that was very rich and like juicy and like thick and warm sounding, this isn't it. Look, not all Class D amps sound the same, I'll admit that, but Class D amps do have a sound, and it's not Class AB. It's just not. Usually, they're going to be a little bit more analytical from top to bottom, just like this guy. Their mid-range is going to be a little bit on the cool and thin side, just like this guy. It kind of is what it is, and it comes with the territory. No big deal, though. I didn't find any major problems from the mid-range up to the top end, honestly. Moving on to the bass, let's talk about the mid-bass first. I never talk about mid-bass, but here it was actually very impressive. I found the mid-bass to be very quick, very agile, very articulate, and very clear. That's not something that I usually pick up on, but it was there, and it was very, very good, honestly, so I feel like I have to mention that. If you're one of those people that looks for that region of sound to be like very like clear and distinct and articulate, this does it. Now, unfortunately, with only about 30 watts at 8 ohms and 50 watts at 4 ohms, which might be mildly inflated anyway, it's not going to give you the best output when it comes to big dynamic swings at louder volumes. I was able to get this guy up to about 75 to 80 dB, or I should say 75 dB listening with 80 dB peaks. Sounded fantastic. It sounded great. I did push it to 85 dB with like 87 dB peaks. Not so good, kind of like the Yamaha RS202. So if you've got a big room, you know, manage your expectations. This is going to be great for something like, if you're going to do like whole house audio, you can like daisy chain a bunch of these and stuff like that. Don't ask me those questions though, guys. Like, I'm not tech support. I don't know about all that. Hit up Arylic. They have a great website, you know what I mean, and ask them those questions. I'm just here to tell you about the sound impressions and help you make a little bit of a buying decision perhaps. Let's move on to the lower bass frequencies. They were good, they were there, but I will say overall the bass quantity as a whole was not as much as I've heard from pretty much any other amp, and that includes cheaper amps like the Emotiva A100, that's just $219. Now, the bass was good, and it was there, and you do have tone controls, so if the amount of bass that it has is not enough for you, feel free to turn them up. Those tone controls, by the way, are adjustable from the remote control, which I found somewhat handy. Volume is adjustable as well. I think you have a mute function and some other things. The remote control pretty much can do everything. There's also an app you can use. It's very similar to the software Blue OS makes for the Bluesound Node 2i. It even has some of the same like minor bugs, like the playlist doesn't load all the way unless you bounce the screen. Anyway, who cares? The app works just fine. I used the Bluetooth, it sounded just fine, just like most Bluetooth does. I used AirPlay, it sounded just fine, but I did notice some minor lip sync issues with AirPlay. If I was watching a YouTube video, for example, I turned off the AirPlay, switched right back to Bluetooth, and the lip sync issues disappeared. So if you're going to use this kind of unit in an AV situation, I would say use Bluetooth instead. Oh, by the way, if you haven't noticed which one it is in this stack, it's this tiny guy right here. I placed it there on purpose next to the Iota VX SA3, or on top of, I should say, because I wanted to show you the size difference. This thing is really tiny, and something to note visually, as you can see on the screen, it looks like the Arylic logo really pops. And those two squares on either side of the logo, those are sensors, and it looks like those pop really hard too. In real world scenario though, they don't. You can't see those two squares on either side of the logo, and the Arylic logo only pops if you've got a ton of light on it. It's mostly just a black screen, which I think is cool. I wouldn't mind though if the Arylic logo popped out a little bit more, because I do think it's kind of pleasing. I like the font they use, but that's a personal thing. I think I've pretty much told you everything I can tell you about this unit. It is good from top to bottom. I enjoyed listening to it. I was listening to entire songs, not just like snippets of songs and fast forwarding. And I will say that's kind of like a compliment to the unit, because my like reference gear is quite expensive in comparison. It's at least 50 or 60 times the price, you know what I mean? But I did find this enjoyable. I used this in my bedroom with the Emotiva Airmotive B1 Pluses for about 3 weeks, and then I moved it down here where I listened to the much more expensive Focal Cora 806s. And one of the cool things about this amp, it was fairly transparent, and when I say that, what I mean is it didn't color the sound of the speakers to the point that they sounded like something else. When I had this connected to the Emotiva Airmotive B1 Pluses, they sounded the way they generally sound. When I connected this amp to the Focal Cora 806s, those sounded the way they generally sound, which I thought was pretty cool. That's typically, again, not something you find for something this cheap. Usually amps this cheap homogenize the sound. It kind of doesn't matter what speakers you plug into it. They generally have the same sound. All the songs even you'll play have a similar sound, almost like they came out of the same recording studio and so on. Anyway, if you have any questions, ask them in the comments below. I think I've covered just about everything. If I didn't already say it, I did my listening impressions with and without a subwoofer using its pre-outs. It worked just fine. I did not connect a larger amplifier. I don't think most people would do that. I think most people will use the pre-outs for a subwoofer, and it's what I recommend. If you have any questions, let's chat about it down below. And until next time, later.